So let's talk about what a philosophical conversation is. All souls?
I locked myself out of my car. I was scared to do that.
You know, your question about being young and having an old soul, the truth is I can't really make much comment about it. I don't really know. All I know is for some strange reason, some young people have the capacity and the ability to gravitate towards things that are a little heavy. Why, how, I don't really know. And it's a mysterious thing. And that's all, you know, I really have to say. I can't say much more. I had in this classroom about maybe 15 years ago, there was this girl, young girl, she was only 14. The first day of class, she was sitting here with her mom. Her mom wanted to know if this is the right class and if I'm the right instructor for her daughter. And she was going to a clown school. So she sat here, and after the class was over the first day, she said, yeah, I think I'm going to just have my daughter enrolled in this class. It'll be good for her. And then every day for about 4 weeks, every day she would raise her hand and ask questions. And I kept telling her, you're only 14, going on 15, just go out there and have fun. These are questions that are just above you. Eventually she dropped the class because I kept harassing her that she should be asking these questions. And eventually she dropped and I never heard from her. And the point is, I have 20-year-olds in my classes, 30-year-olds, 40-year-olds who are stuck, who don't really take these ideas seriously, who are not interested in these ideas. And then once in a while you have these young kids, you know, who take these ideas very seriously. They have fun with them. You know, it's like somebody, you know, Freud's wife, I forget her name, but she used to say that Freud locks himself in a room and just plays with ideas the way sometimes people lock themselves in a room and watch porn magazines, you know. And he says, I have no idea why Sigmund can do that or how he can do that. Just lock himself in a room and just think thoughts for 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 hours. I mean, it's an amazing thing when you go back and read the life story of Sigmund Freud. At a very, very young age, he's just fascinated to know why human beings are the way that they are. I mean, most of the young kids, they want to go to Target. They want to go out and have a good time with life. I mean, stupid fun. I mean, it's good for their age. But then you have a loner like Freud. I mean, temperamentally he's a loner. Temperamentally he is gloomy and dark. And he enjoys gravitating towards things that are heavy. You know, even when you read the Gospels, for example, you have all these 12-year-olds just having fun in the streets, playing soccer or playing football or frisbee. Then you have Jesus. Never laughs. You know, and at the age of 12, he just says, I think I'm going to go see where God is. What? And if your question is, well, how do you explain that? I don't. I can't. I don't have the knowledge or the information or insight as to why nature creates such freaks. But what usually happens, let's just say you happen to be of that temperament where you're at 20 and you think heavy thoughts and you feel heavy emotions. And then you hang out with your friends and they goof off, they goof around, they have fun all the time. But, you know, they're your friends. You have a history with them. And sometimes you say, well, I want to be like them, but I can't. And sometimes they look at you and say, Thomas, why are you messing everything up? Just have a good time. Okay. And the truth is, carrying the burden of heaviness is always going to be difficult. And there are times very much like Jesus Christ. I mean, you may be 20, but once in a while, people who are heavy, they say, please God, let this cup pass by me. Allow me to just go out and have a good time for a month or 2 or 3 or 4. I don't want to carry this cross every single day on my shoulders. I want to be like other people. You envy them. You become jealous of them. You're angry at yourself and at them because you don't want to be who you are. And it's going to take you some time, where you can kind of just grow in your own skin and be okay with who and what you are. Now, there is, of course, an organic way of being heavy and there is a manufactured way of being heavy. And we've talked about this before. It's always nice to be 40 and then your father dying. And then you say, man, it's really sad to have lost a father. Okay? And it's very different than when you're 5 and your father and your mom divorce. And then you have this anger inside you. I never had a father. I never had a mother. And then you have to carry this burden for the rest of your life. And it's unhealthy if it's been unresolved. So for the longest time in our history, most of the emotions that we used to have were quite natural and organic. You hang out with your father. He's a relatively decent human being. He's no angel, but he's relatively decent. Then he dies and you feel sad. And you feel sad because he's no longer around. Today, of course, you feel sad because your father has never, ever, ever been around. And sadness accompanies a good amount of anger. And now you need therapy. Okay. Now, the other thing you need to know, since you guys live in America, and most of you are simmered and seasoned by the American culture, you need to understand that American people and American culture, it's a very ambitious culture. When you are ambitious, you are greedy. When you are greedy, you have a great amount of lust inside you. You're like Tony Montana. You want the world. You're never going to stop until you own the world. Okay? That's what happens when you have a good amount of privilege and you have a lot of opportunities. Just lust and greed oozes out of you. And it's not even your fault. And you're never going to be satisfied by just being 1 or 2 or 3 things. You want to be everything. Okay? So remember when you read, for example, the Catholic doctrines, for example, of the 7 deadly sins, lust, for our parents, maybe 4 or 5 things. A woman would be ambitious. I just want to marry a man who's got money. Today, that's not the case. You want a man who's got money. You also want great kids. You also want 25 Teslas and a mansion. You also want to be a CEO. You also want to be recognized. You want to be on TikTok, on Instagram, on YouTube. There is no end. آدمی در عالم خاکی نمی آید به دست آدمی دیگر بباید ساخت وزن آدمی. If you really, really want to be a philosopher, leave America. Go somewhere, live in poverty for a while, allow the pain to season you the right way, and then come back to America and reap the benefits. Yes?
Whole young person with an old soul thing. Not even a real thing. Would that just be being normal? I feel like that's rooted into the idea that we expect children to be pure and innocent, and that's like a relatively new concept. I don't know, there's been a lot of conversations about like the way we think about children these days. These pure and perfect things comes from like a Disneyfication of the way we see childhood. I don't know how to talk about this.
Well, if you go back to Taoism, which is a tradition that's about 3,000 years old, perhaps, give or take a few thousand years, one of the ways that you need to be categorized as a proficient Taoist is by being childlike. There are great qualities that children have that adults sometimes look at them and envy them. The fact that whether it's physiological, I don't really know, that when they're very, very young, they hold no grudges. They're free. They're governed by the spirit of the law as opposed to the letter of the law. It's kind of like John Lame Deer. He's a Native American. And he used to argue that when the white man went to their tribes and these soldiers would give them money, paper money, dollars, these young kids would make them into kites, tiny airplanes, just, fly them around. And Lame Deer would say, why is it that the white man puts so much value in a piece of paper? Children know what to do with dollar bills. They make kites, they make planes. because they haven't yet been touched by certain things, you know. So the idea of the innocence of children and ultimately becoming contaminated by the social world created by the adults, it's always been there, you know. There is also something that happens to you when you are in the midst of children. But I don't want to talk about that stuff. It's uninteresting, really. Philosophy.
I wasn't like saying like innocence wasn't important, but when I say like you can root a lot of these things in like Disney's ideal of childhood, like a lot of people who worked at Disney were talking about like how they didn't want to reduce it to just innocence because children are more than just that.
Yeah, they're vicious. Yeah.
Yeah, a lot of people within Disney complained that you really shouldn't flatten the complexity of being human into this.
Let's do it this other way. Look, instead of taking it to Disney and all that, the idea of justice, the idea of equality, the idea of removing poverty, getting rid of racism, these are all 18th century narratives. For the longest time, people were unequal and they were okay being unequal. Not okay in the sense that, oh, okay, that's fine. But that's just the way life was. In the 18th century, something interesting happened. The idea is that all human beings are rational and all human beings possess intelligence. That makes all of us equal. Let's create a society where everybody's equal. These ideas are relatively young, about 200 years old. Most of the dreams and hopes today we have has to do with the age of reason. All the narratives that they shove down our throats. Why do you want to talk about kids when most of all the awful poison that lives inside us now has its root in the 18th century or so? Yeah. Ray? Yeah.
The whole conversation, it reminded me of agreement, and like I was thinking, I was trying to actively listen. Do you think that agreement is like just a miracle of life? Because
Agreement?
yeah, because nobody's really the same. And this is kind of like a different thing. Like, do you think that we could ever really agree on something, truly agree on something, because we all have completely different histories and ideas about things?
I think if you go home today and just go to YouTube and listen to an orchestra, you have like 50 people playing all different instruments. They know their place. They know when they have to play. They know when they have to pause. Okay? They know who's going to be the lead pianist, the lead violinist, the lead celloist. And everybody knows. There may be some envy in there. There may be some jealousy in there, some anger in there. Why didn't the conductor choose me to be the leader as opposed to that bozo over there? All of those things may exist. But everybody works in unison. There's an agreement. Look at this classroom. On what could we actually agree? None of us are good at anything. We don't think well. We come from different backgrounds we don't really understand. We have emotions we don't understand. We have assumptions we don't really understand and they've been unexamined. Nothing about us lives in harmonious within ourselves. Now you're asking, well, let's all come out and join a brotherhood. The only person in this classroom who needs to lead is me. And should I hear a music being played badly, I have to shut it down.
Wait.
No. Look. One of the things about things that are tactile. Let's just say playing the violin. Nobody needs to tell you from the outside that you suck. Pick up the violin, play it. The violin in a very, very nice language will tell you, you suck. Piano, you suck. Won't you go home and make dinner?
I'm just.
Yeah, and then invite 1,000 people. And they'll tell you, you suck. You don't even need to invite anybody. Make some food and taste it. You realize you suck. Do laundry that you have never done. You realize all your clothes come out with colors called diversity that you can't ever wear afterwards. You realize, well, you suck at that as well. What you can do though, is you can sit in your room and have thoughts and then write a book. And they say, I'm great at thinking. And that's what our flaws really are. You know, all of us in abstract think very highly of ourselves. And that's just, you know, the way things are. So when you speak about humility, when you speak about self-confidence, the truth is you have to be at a certain place in life where you've been beaten down, where you've been examined, challenged, and you found yourself to be incompetent. And it has to be an honest understanding. And then you say, okay, I think I really suck at thinking. I need to go to school and figure out how I can learn how to learn. You know, I mean, that's the thing we talked about at the very beginning of the class, which was when you don't have experience in something, you actually assume that you can do a relatively good job at it. Once you begin journeying that path, you realize how incompetent you really, really, really are. I mean, I know all of you in this class have great ideas. Find someone who has an addiction. Try to help that person, and you will come to realize how difficult it is. But don't do that. And you know what you'll do? You'll be like a Karl Marx. You will write a book, How to Fix Society. Not just one person, 400 million people. And then your book will be a bestseller. You know, and I think that's something that Confucius taught us. You know, before you want to find the right person for your life, make sure you are right for life, period. Once you realize you're right for life, then go find someone that's right for you. Now you have two people who know exactly who and what they are. Now have a kid. Now because you know what's good for you, for your life, now you will inject those good things into your kids. And just in case you have a neighbor who just doesn't think well, but wants to get married, you know that if this person gets married, they're going to have a wrong companion. That person is going to get pregnant. They're going to inject all the wrong things in this kid. And what little innocence that kid had will eventually evaporate. Once you kind of fix people one at a time, you realize your entire tribe is fine. You don't need to fix anyone or anything. That's how communities used to be for the longest time. Everybody knew everybody. There was only one store in your entire community. Nobody would rob anybody because your name, your reputation had a great amount of value. But when you create a zoo of 500,000 people in a tiny little city where everybody has no choice but to walk around as a stranger, well, you're robbing a stranger. And you just hope that you never get caught or you never see them again. But in a town of 50 people, everybody knows you. So if you have to manufacture things that didn't really exist many, many years ago, and it's nearly impossible. Yeah.
Because you mentioned addiction, I wanted to tie that back to the conversation we were having earlier with Freud. Could you explain his hyper-obsession with like figuring out people, at least partially, all the cocaine he was doing?
Wait, what?
All the cocaine he was doing.
Who?
Sigmund Freud. He was doing a lot of cocaine.
Okay, a couple of things. In the 1800s, 1900s, and of course to our present day, we have always been looking for a magic pill, a shortcut to fix people. So it is true that when he was 15 or 16, he was working with people who claimed that they had found ultimately this thing. And remember, they were working with a lot of people who were kind of psychologically ill. They had a lot of repressed emotions. They had a lot of traumas, nightmares. And they said, is there a way that we can free people from the bondage of what they have went through? And so they gave them cocaine. Okay. Many things they did. Cocaine was just one of them. And so they gave them cocaine, and everybody came out and celebrated because it actually did the job. The only problem was it put people in paradise, or this hypnotic stage of comfort, for maybe a week, maybe 2 weeks, maybe 3 weeks. Eventually they went back to the person they've always been, angry and repressed. But they also realized they have two problems now. The nightmare is still there. Their physical body is now addicted to this thing called cocaine. So they put that on the side. They never experimented, at least Freud didn't, until he got to be about 60 or so when he was diagnosed with cancer of the mouth or jaw. Now, one of the things about Freud that you need to understand is he never wanted to intake so much cocaine that would make him lose his mind, because he was so devoted to his work. Give me enough cocaine to numb the pain, but eventually I want to get back to work. So this idea that Freud was addicted to cocaine, maybe he was a little bit, but not to the point where his work and his fascination with human behavior, human mind, human psychology went way, way in the footnotes to the point of being invisible. He was always at work, always. But it's one of those things that's floating around. It's been floating around for many, many, many generations. Freud was a coke addict. He wasn't. And you also need to understand what happens when you have cancer. What happens when you have a certain physical sickness that creates so much pain and there is nothing out that can remedy it. You will resort to things that you had promised yourself never to do. Freud was a prophet of the 20th century. Truly was. Yeah.
Life is, in a way, like a living hell. Do you think that, and if we say that death is like the only real sleep or rest for people, are human beings just not really meant for life in that way?
I think if you were to look at Charles Darwin, first let me give you this poem by Rumi. And you don't need to know who Rumi is, just he was a poet around the 11th century. رو سر بنه به بالین تنها مرا رها کن ترک من خراب شبگرد مبتلا کن ماییم و موج سودا شب تا به روز تنها خواهی بیا ببخشا خواهی برو جفا کن از من گریز تا تو هم در بلا نیفتی بگزین ره سلامت ترک ره بلا کن. That life is a sickness, and the only way you could be free of the sickness is death. Okay. But you could approach life as an entity that is sick in a couple of ways. You know, you sit back, you observe, you pay attention, you reflect on the things you pay attention to and observe, and you realize nothing out there really is good. And remember what I said at the very beginning of the class. You get to this point after having lived some life. Get married when you're young. It's filled with hope and dreams and fantasies. It's beautiful. I mean, imagine you, your companion, a few kids, you have a house, beautiful backyard, beautiful front yard. It's beautiful. What is not there to like? Time passes. And you can only intellectualize this at your stage. Okay? Time passes and you realize you have spent, and you have to internalize this in the sense that you say, well, my kids are going to put me through what I put my parents through. My parents worried about my school, my friends, drugs, all the poison in society. And they screamed and they shouted and I never listened. And it took me 40 years to figure out that they were right. Those kids will do the same thing to me. And my father is now dead. I never really had a chance to say thank you to him, apologize to him. And let's just say you get married at the age of 50. And let's just say you're 60 and your kid is 2. You will never live to see your kid ever getting up and saying, Dad, you were right, I am wrong. Your story will remain incomplete. Okay? Now, when you get to be 60, like Rumi, for example, at the age of 40, when your relationship with time, with yourself, with life changes, then you're going to look at and say, really? Are you telling me that people have to go through all these different stages? Okay. Get to a dead end, be forced to reflect at all the things they have done, only to now sit and observe in regret. And then they want to move forward only to realize there is no place to go. Now, for someone who is introspective like that, life can be a very, very painful journey. And one of the best books that you will ever read in the entire life that speaks about how miserable and tragic life is, the Gospel of Judas. You know, at the age of 12, you say, life is no good this way. I want to make life meaningful. And the only meaning that life has is to live through the kingdom of God. I don't know where it is right now inside me. So he leaves his parents at the age of 12, supposedly. He goes to Egypt, to Persia, to India. He has teachers. He does all sorts of things. He comes back at the age of 30. He has found a good amount of wisdom, but he is a very novice young teacher. His assumption is, because I am wise and because people can see that I am wise and feel that I'm wise, they will easily receive my message and I'll be like alchemical. In other words, I will be magic for them. I am like this liquid that will go inside them, and if they are metal, they will turn into gold. He preaches for about 3 years. He does all sorts of things in the Gospel of Judas, and he says, you know what? I went on this quest to find God. I found God. God told me, go back and rescue his creatures. I went back. I realized I'm stoned. I am rejected. I am whipped. I am belted. I am spat upon. I don't want to talk. I don't want to live. I'd rather die. Now that is a place of someone who came into life being held hostage by passions of life, realizing that passions are no good, went on the spiritual quest, again fueled by hopes and dreams, came back to society, no different than Malcolm, Gandhi, Muhammad, all these folks, thinking, assuming, like Marx, that if I write a great book, social justice will be achieved. But very much like, the heroes of the past came to realize, I may have wisdom, but you need customers for that. And people really are not good customers for wisdom. And since everywhere I turn, I see nothing but misery, my only escape is death. That's a good sickness to have. Okay? Then you have someone who just from the moment they're born, their parents have been abusive, their environment has been abusive, every way they turn, society just kind of punishes them. By the time you're 10, you have nothing of your soul left. And you're like a wounded animal, you just go on with life till you're 60, and then you just die a miserable death. Allahu Akbar. Last question and then we'll go home. Forgive me, it's his fault, yeah. Go ahead.
Do you think that the only way for us to have, I'm just going to say self-reflection, is to write our thoughts down because we're so, and think about what we wrote, because we're so limited by our memories and the capacity we have. Like in the moment, if I think about something, right, or like ask a question.
My response to your question is going to be very biased, and it's because my own experience has been the following. I was young with a lot of passion, a lot of curiosities, a lot of miseries. I ran into a guy. I worked with him for 10 years, and through him, my life little by little became organized. So whenever you talk about sitting, thinking, writing, reading, my answer is always going to be, in all branches of life that you want to be good and proficient in, you need a teacher. Never walk towards proficiency on any path without a teacher, because the pitfalls, the ditches out there, some are visible, many are invisible. You will fall. You will get lost. One of the best things I think young people should do, instead of just being entertained by their own thoughts, you're at a place where you can just sit and read. Just read. Read as much as you possibly can. Do not be deceived by the propaganda of diversity out there in the world, in society. Forget that. Go to a bookstore, buy tons of books. Read the Gospels, read Marx, read Freud, read Plato. Read, just read. Have diversity of ideas and let them be inside you. 10 years, 20 years later, you realize you're really being seasoned well by these ideas. Then you can go out there and you have a little bit of Malcolm in you, a little bit of Gandhi in you, a little bit of Moses in you, Jesus in you. And these are all contradictory ideas. But you have been seasoned to do well with all the conflicts. Now they live in harmonious inside you. Ray. Assalamu alaikum, everybody.